Hello and welcome to Breakthroughs with Bree, where we are discussing all the topics that create extraordinary breakthroughs in our personal and spiritual development journeys. I'm Bree, otherwise known as Healing with Bree, and I'm a spiritual coach and Akashic Records channelers who helps sensitives and intuitives connect more deeply with their hearts, intuition, and souls, and teaches people how to process and alchemize the fears and beliefs that hold them back from living in their authenticity and purpose. You're in the right place if you like to hear about spirituality, psychology, healing, consciousness, manifestation, developing your spiritual and intuitive gifts, and living from your heart and soul instead of from your fears and ego. I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Breakthroughs with Bree. Today, I could not be more excited. My heart could not be more full. We have such a special guest. We have a somatic, heartset, mindset, and business coach who is also the co-host of a fan favorite podcast around here, Spiraling Higher. Today, we have Gina Bourne on the podcast. Hi, Gina.
Hello. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. I have been waiting for this conversation. I'm so ready.
I am so ready too. I'm so grateful that this all worked out. And the timing is perfect because we have a really juicy topic that we're going to talk about today, which is parenting from the soul. And we're going to get more into that throughout the episode, but I would love for us all to get to know Gina a little bit better here at the start. So Gina, I'm going to ask you some of my rapid fire questions
I'm so
and we're
ready.
going to get to know you.
Yay! I love
Okay.
this.
So first question, what are your pronouns and where are you located in the world?
She and her are my pronouns, and I am in Vancouver, Canada, on the West Coast.
Love. I actually have a lot of Canadian girlies in the community, so they'll love to be
Amazing.
represented.
I want to talk to more Canadian girlies. I feel like a lot of our audiences, around the world, we definitely have Canadian listeners as well, but please DM me. I want to talk to all of you. Let's find all the spiritual Canadians.
100%. I have so many that I can send your way. Okay, so she, her, you are in Canada. Now, what is your big three in astrology, if you know it?
Yes, so I'm a Cancer Sun, Libra Rising, and Leo Moon, and I have 3 other Cancer placements, so I'm very Cancerian.
Yes, I've looked at Gina's chart. Her and I have done work together, so I did like a little chart comparison. She has very strong
Oh,
Cancer
yes.
energy, and which
Yes.
I love with my Cancer rising. Like there just was like a lot of beautiful synastry with all of that.
Yeah, all of my Cancer placements are also in the house of career, which I think really makes a lot of sense for my career choice, and just even all of my other jobs too. So I'm really bringing in a lot of that feminine kind of flowy, soft
Nurturing.
energy, yes, into something that traditionally might feel a little bit more masculine. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I love it, especially with that like Libra and the Leo. To me, intuitively, it feels very relationship oriented. It does feel like it's nurturing, it's generous. It's like, how can I take action to nurture connection, nurture relationships, especially with that like emotional orientation. It's a really lovely combination there. Do you happen to know your human design?
I am a generator. God, I forget the numbers. It's either a 6-2 or a 2-6, something there. I know it's like sacral authority. Yeah, that's about the extent of my knowledge for my human design.
I love that. I'm a 4/6, so we share at least one line for sure.
Nice, nice.
Yeah, manifesting generator. So I am like always like changing it up and energy. Do you know what Sam is, by the way? Her, if you guys don't know, Sam is her co-host on Spiraling Higher.
Oh my God, I do know. I think she's a manifester or she's a projector. We did have a human design person on our podcast too, but I think she's a projector, but
Love
I
it.
don't really know what that means too much. But yeah.
I'm like learning more and more about human design. I've had quite a few people on as well. I just think it's such a fun modality,
So
are all
fun.
of these for like self-connection and self-awareness and self-understanding. So it's great. Next question is, do you know any of like your Myers-Briggs personality types, Enneagram, any
Ooh.
stuff like that?
Okay, oh my God, I'm so bad. I always have to text my friend for what my Enneagram is. I think I'm a 3. Is that the achiever?
Yes, the 3 is the
Yes.
achiever and the 2 is the helper. So
Okay, yes,
usually
I'm a
people,
3.
yeah.
Definitely 3. I don't know what my wings are, apparently. I just learned about the wings. The Myers-Briggs, I think I'm an ENFJ.
That does
I
sound
think
right.
it's the same as like Meghan Markle. Somebody told me that. But I'm pretty sure it's an ENFJ. ENFJ, yeah.
You want to know what's so funny is that when I first tested, I was an ENFJ too.
No way.
I'm like right on the cusp because the way that one works is like you're a percentage, right? So
Yes.
I was like, the last time I tested, I was like 51% I and 49%
That was
E, you
me.
know?
That was me.
And then the other one was the J. Now I'm like 52% P, and which is a little bit more creative, and like 48% J, which is a little bit more like plan and structure, you know? So I flip-flop, but the first one I ever got was ENFJ. And the character that they said was also ENFJ was Gandalf the Grey from Lord of the Rings. So that's the one I remember. You're like, oh, it's Meghan Markle. And I'm like, oh, it's Gandalf the Grey.
That's so funny. That's hilarious. I'm actually really curious to see what would happen if I took that test now, because I took that years ago when I was in a very different energy. Because I also am very much on that towing the line of E and I, like the introvert extrovert. I think I
Yeah.
present very much as an extrovert, but I'm also quite shy and can kind of, yeah, shrink a little bit sometimes. But, and I also really recharge by being alone. So I'm curious to take that again. I'll let you know what my answers are after.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you flip-flop back and forth because when I was in my corporate life, I did like a team building for a whole region that was around all of this. And it was interesting, the E and the I, one of the differentiators is that the I's like really get information by inner reflection. That like that's like a really big orientation of it. So I feel like a lot of people as they get older and they kind of get into the healing work, like that I energy just becomes a little bit more prominent. So
Yeah, that's interesting because I definitely go inward a lot. That's why I need a lot of alone time. I mean, it's also very Cancerian of like me going into my shell and being alone in there. So I do wonder, I think the persona that I had when I was working in corporate and building businesses, I think that the E, the extrovert side had to come out more.
mhm.
So I'm curious to know now, knowing myself so much better in such a different way now, what would come out. So I'll let you know. I'll let
Please
you
do.
know.
I'm
Yeah.
so curious. Okay, last one before our fun one is, do you know your life path number, like your numerology stuff?
Yes, 4.
Okay, that's so interesting. Another person I had on was Jackie, who we talked about before. She's a four as
Hmm.
well, and I'm a five. And I've like had people on who are on like either side. So I've had sixes, I've had fives, and I've had, well, actually, that's a lie. I also had somebody who's a nine, and she's so freaking rad. But anyway, I love the life path numerology stuff. Do you know what life cycle number you're on this year?
No, you know what? We had an awesome numerologist on, and she gave us like a whole calendar. I don't remember. I think I know. I think Sam's on. I know what Sam's is. She's, I think, on a life path cycle like 9 this year.
Me
I can't remember
too.
what mine is. No way. That's
Yes.
so funny. Yeah, I'll have to check.
Yeah, I don't remember mine because I'm 1 year ahead of the collective. So the collective is in a year eight, and I was in a year eight last year. And so that's like one of the ways that I kind of remember. And it's fascinating, especially like I'm also very like scientifically oriented. I studied like pre-veterinary science in school. Like that's what I went to school for at UC Davis initially before I changed that up. So like the math and the chemistry and like the biology of everything is just so fascinating to me. And I
Yeah,
think numerology is such an interesting study because like when you really boil everything down, it's kind of just numbers. Like that is really what's underneath all this energetic stuff
I
that we
know.
talk
It's
about.
like
So
spiritual calculus or something.
that's exactly what it is. I've never heard anybody say that, but that is
It just
absolute
came to me.
perfection.
Just feels like algebra or calculus, but for the soul.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, so I would love for everybody to hear a little bit about your story. I know this question is so overwhelming because you're like, what do I say? I could talk for 30 years. Like there's so many parts of the story. But in terms of like what brought you to what you're doing now, and maybe even talking a little bit about what it is that you're doing now, what's on your heart, how you're letting your own like unique magic flow into the world, right? Like a lot of what I talk about is letting your life be led by your soul and being able to be the most you can possibly be from that soul place, like learning what that is and starting to bring that out and playing with that and just deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think when people are so curious about purpose, what they're wondering is, what does that look like when I'm being the most me into the world? The things I'm passionate, I'm acting on, the ways I want to connect with people, I'm connecting, the things I want to create, I'm creating. You know what I'm saying? So I share all of that just to say, I would love to hear you describe like how you've come to this point with the work that you're doing and how you would describe like how this is your soul work, like how this is your heart work and why you love it so much.
Wow, that was such a beautiful setup. I love how you talked about purpose essentially being yourself. I think that the world right now is very obsessed with finding the purpose and finding like what my path is. But truly, I think your path and purpose is always going to be being in fullest expression of who you are and what's alive for you in this moment, in this season of your life. And when we follow that, that's the purpose. And that's why the purpose is never an end goal or this thing that we're trying to get to. It's literally a state of being. And so I love that you named it that way. So for me personally, yeah, it's so hard to know, like, how far do I go back? I was born on a summer day. It was an afternoon. I grew up in Canada, very, very small towns. Just a very quick background on my childhood. I definitely was taught it was not safe to be myself. My parents were very traditional Asian parents who had a very specific idea of what they thought being a good kid was and what a good life would look like. And they worked very hard. My parents were serial entrepreneurs. We moved every 2 to 3 years. So I really grew up without having a sense of security of who I was because it was different every time I went somewhere. And I think with my parents not necessarily seeing me and really just seeing who they wanted me to be, I internalized this sense of I have to be someone other than me, to be accepted. And then, obviously you fast forward in and lots of therapy, lots of coaching that I've invested in myself. It's about really when you become an adult, it's about unlearning who you're not so that you can learn who you really are. And I think over the past, definitely since I became a mom, so this is a perfect podcast to talk about this on, but when I became a mom, it's when I really started to get to know who I was. And I think raising a child reflects so much to you, but especially what your experience was like as a child. And I think for me, as I went on that journey, I actually got into real estate when I first became a mom. I've always been into business. As I shared earlier, my 4 cancer placements are all in the house of career. And I've always been career driven, but I was always very driven and motivated by external measures, right? Wanting the validation, the money, the status, whatever it might be. And I think when I became a mom, a lot of that started to shift. So I've been on this healing journey, this spiritual journey for like 2 decades. But since becoming a mom, my daughter's 9 now. So almost 10 years ago, I think I just really rediscovered who I am and what I want to do. And I transformed the way that I ran my businesses. I really shifted away from doing it for like this external validation and for the clout. I really divorced myself from that. And on that journey, I started to realize, like, why do I want to keep building my business and growing it exponentially every year? Like, why do I feel so driven to have these things, And I started to question a lot of that. And then ultimately I realized, okay, if I really could do anything that I truly wanted, what would that be? And I think for me, coaching, doing things like a podcast were always something that I desired to do, but it really graded up against this inner core belief that I don't think I'm good enough to do this, and I don't think my voice matters. I don't think what I share is good or valid or any of those things. And so, becoming a mom though, and observing the way that I want my daughter to speak to herself, like I could see it so clearly what I was doing to myself. Right. So I think that's the thing when you're a mom, everything you do, your kids start to mirror. It's the perfect mirror. And so I started to see the way that I treated myself so much more clearly. And I kind of committed to developing ways to help myself heal so that I could see myself more clearly and take those steps and actions and pursue a dream for the sake of it mattering to me, not because I need anybody else to validate it, not because I want everyone else to believe in me, but can it be enough that I just want to try? And so I left my real estate business, which was very hard to do because I built that for 9 years and I had a team and people that I loved working with, but we had somebody named Xavier on. I know you know him, Xavier Dagba. He's amazing. He talks about shadow careers and how shadow careers are the thing that you kind of do that's in the shadow of the thing that you actually really want to do, right? And it's often presents as something you're really good at and that you really enjoy doing it. And real estate was that for me, but it wasn't my highest calling anymore. And so I took the leap. And I mean, thankfully I have a co-host partner who kind of got me to do the podcast and took that leap with her. And then it became kind of unbearable to keep ignoring this inner calling of, I feel like I'm really meant to coach. And I took the leap and now I'm here. So I don't know how long that took, but that is my life in a nutshell.
Thank you so much for sharing. I know there's going to be so many parts of that people hear and say, oof, I feel that, or like, oof, that was me, because like tale as old as time, and like they say on TikTok, like, can I have just one unique experience? No, like you share that experience with so many people in the world, but there is something that's still so beautiful about claiming it as our own, right? When we finally are like, okay, this is what's going on. Like, this is what I'm kind of creating for myself in my life. Like, this is the plot that I'm working in. You know what I mean? And be able to like really grab onto that. And I mean, obviously, I'm so grateful that you took the leap because I love what you and Sam create on your podcast. It's so important. And I love that you do the coaching work by yourself. I worked with Gina and she just like, it's obvious that you were made for this. And it's obvious that there's people who need the kind of energy that you bring to coaching. And I'm just feeling called to say for everybody too, like there might be a million different people technically doing what you're doing, but nobody's going to do it the way that you do it, right? There's so many coaches right now. And I think that's great. There's so many people in the world. So by all means, let there be coaches that do it. But like Gina does it in Gina's way, you know, like she does it with that open heart and that compassion and that vulnerability and that softness, you know, and people need that kind of energy. And there's a million different coaches who will do it a little bit different. And I just found so much value in like the way that you embody your vulnerability and like you embody your sense of love, which I have to imagine also comes from being a mom, from you learning to love a little human.
Yeah.
I would love for you to maybe talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, I've always been very sensitive, very emotional, very attuned to my feelings. I have no problems feeling my feelings. I always live in there much more than I live in my mind. And so, yeah, I think becoming a mom unlocks, I mean, this is my experience. I think a lot of moms have very different experiences around this, but I think for me personally, it unlocked like a whole other tier of love that I was like, I didn't even know I could feel this deeply. And it's also weird because I've talked about this before as well, that you have a baby and you like look at it and you're like, who the hell are you? It's like, you're a literal stranger, but you came out of my body. It's a super weird feeling, and you love them so much, but it also feels really weird to love somebody you've never really met before. But it does unlock a whole other layer of love. But I will say that absolutely the biggest catalyst for my deepest work and deepest healing has been my daughter, hands down, for sure. Because I think she's also unlocked for me. It's like the more that I love her, the more that it unlocks love for myself. Because the more that I see reasons to love her, I'm reflected back of, wait, I have reasons to love me too. And so I think for me personally, externalizing this person that I love outside of me has actually helped me to access a deeper love inside of me. Yeah. So
I love that.
I think that answers your question.
Oh, it totally does. Yeah, I've been really excited about the idea of doing an episode specifically on parenting. And this episode has this intention of how we can parent from the soul versus from the ego, because doing anything from our soul energy versus our ego is very different.
Hmm.
And I know the people that are in this community and then who listen to this, they desire to do the things that are important to them from their heart and from their soul. And something as sacred and as important as parenting, of course, they want to do that from that like really authentic soul energy. So like we're going to get into that in the meat and potatoes of this episode in just a minute. But I just
Yes.
want to say that like, even though I'm not a parent yet, I do feel like that's my path. That's something that's inevitable. I've channeled a lot of information to parents. A lot of my coaching clients, I think like 95% of them have all been mothers. And what has always been very clear to me doing channeling work, whether it's with coaching sessions or my Akashic sessions, is that you do get plugged into a different level of like divine love
Mm.
in this agreement and in this experience with parenting. Many people do. I talk about like plugging into different energies is like literally like a plug into a wall. When you
Yeah.
get plugged into the vibration of that kind of love, like that experience changes you. The way that you're looking at the world, the glasses, the little lenses you're looking at the world through is different. The way that you feel in your body is different because you are actually having a different current of energy running through your system. So when, you know, people have kids, and that does not have to be biologically, but when you experience that sort of parental relationship, it does feel like there's this really deep soul and spiritual significance to that path, to that agreement that unlocks a whole nother level of experience, which allows us as humans to like mentally start to understand like what does that even mean to
Hmm.
unconditionally love something? What does that mean to just love in general? Like what does
Hmm.
that mean to cherish something? Like what does that mean to be connected to? Like what does that even mean? It's like a whole nother level, which is why it's
Hmm.
such like a fascinating topic to me, and why I like, even again, I'm not a parent. I follow parenting accounts. I follow like
I
all the
love that
kind
you
of stuff.
do.
I'm like, I'm trying to parent myself, and then there's going to be a kid
Yes.
around, and like,
I mean, frankly, I think everyone should be following parenting accounts because so much of this work ultimately is reparenting ourselves. That's
yeah.
all that it is. And I think that's why
Mhm.
parenting my daughter has helped me to become the kind of mom that I've always needed. And that's what we all need. We all just need the mom that we need. within ourselves, right? And of course, for those of us who do have really good relationships with our moms, it's still important for us to embody that inner parent now. Because as an adult, our parents are no longer our lifeline. We are, right? And so much of what happens when we grow up is we just project these initial attachment wounds we've had with our parents onto every other relationship, including the one with ourselves, the one with our business, the one with our kids. And so whether or not you are a parent, reparenting is going to be the key pathway for us to really meet our own needs and to even know what they are and to be able to, support ourselves in every season of our life in the way that we really need. That's unique to us. So I love that you attune to so many parenting things, but I think it also speaks to this knowing that you have that you are absolutely going to be a mom. And I think just upon meeting you, you have such a beautiful maternal energy too. Like I'm sure you get that a lot. Yeah, there's just like a very grounded mothering energy. So I am very excited for your future child. They're very lucky to have you as their guide and their mother in this world.
Oh, I appreciate that. We're going to take a quick break because we're both raring to talk more about this, and we'll be back in just a minute. All right, everybody, we're back. I have some really juicy questions that I channeled through. I also put a question box on my Instagram for questions that people might have about, how they might struggle or feel a little bit confused about parenting from the soul. And if you're a little bit new to my podcast, I talk a lot about releasing ego patterns, releasing like ego strategies to pick up soul strategies, to really be led by your soul energy. And to me, it's an ego strategy when there's fear involved, because that's the language of the ego. That's how it keeps us alive. That's how we survive. So when there's fear, when there's heaviness, when there's pain, when there's suffering, that's a signal that we got some ego stories, we got some ego beliefs, we got some 3D level kind of stuff going on. And we're always trying to learn that. It has so much wisdom for us, so much wisdom and freedom for us. And then choose the soul way, the soul strategy, the soul perspective on it all. And we're doing that today with parenting. Before we get started, though, neither Gina or I are claiming to be parenting experts. Please use your own discernment, take what resonates, take what feels empowering. Nothing that is going to be said is to shame anybody. It's literally just to support. It's literally just to share what's on our heart and to maybe bring, I don't know, a certain aspect of levity or a certain aspect of camaraderie or love or compassion to something that is so difficult because it is so powerfully transformative. So just as a caveat before we get started into all of this, we're here to help. We're here to love. I know
We're
this
just here
is
to
touchy for
share.
people. We're just here to share, and
Totally.
we're so excited to do that with you.
Yes, you worded all of that so beautifully.
Okay, so my first question for you, Gina, and we've already talked a little bit about this, but what opportunity do you think that parenting gives people who are wanting to have that sort of personal and spiritual growth in their life?
Ooh, I mean, I think it's the greatest opportunity you can have, right? As you said, we mentioned earlier that your kids are always mirroring back who you're being, what's inside of you, right? Our kids are literally these almost carbon copies in the beginning, right? It's the mirror neurons, right? They're witnessing you, they're observing you, and they can read energy better than any of us adults can. And so, in so many ways, I think the greatest opportunity we have is to see what is being reflected in our kids and or what's being arisen in us in the context of parenting, right? So for a lot of parents, they get really triggered by their kids. I mean, I think all parents do. For me, for example, in the mornings used to be one of my least favorite times because they were so busy all the time. It was this crazy getting ready, and it was so frantic, and I would get frustrated with my kid and I'd be frustrated with myself. And instead of blaming how busy the mornings are, it's a reflection of, why am I being so triggered? Why is my state in the morning so high, right? It's this very activated nervous system that is very upregulated, and why is that happening? And it's about tracing back, where does that really start, and what is the unmet need underneath all of that, right? So instead of just projecting it onto my kid and being it's her fault, she forgot XYZ, it's about, why does that bother me and where did this actually start? So for me personally, I do also have a lot of parent clients, and I always tell them to kind of rewind back way before that trigger even started, whether it be a month, a few days, a few weeks, to kind of find, where did you start to ignore your own needs? right? I think anytime we're getting triggered, it's usually just a sign of many missed attempts or maybe missed signs, another way of saying that, of you giving yourself what you needed, right? So we only get triggered when we haven't met our own needs and we aren't really attuning to what those are. And so I think parenting is such a beautiful way of seeing where our boundaries maybe are being crossed, where we're not setting them well enough, where we're not taking care of ourselves. So yeah, I think there's such a good opportunity. Like I said earlier, being a mom has been the greatest catalyst for all of my healing. Yeah, I have lots of examples. I don't know if there's follow-up questions to this, so I don't want to keep going too far, but
I'm
yeah.
sure we'll have plenty of opportunity for more
Yes.
examples with the kinds of questions we had come through. Okay, my next question for you. There's many different ways that we could approach parenting, right? Many different perspectives, many different ultimate goals that we could consider as a part of parenting that of course affect our strategies that we used for like accomplishing what the actual goal is of parenting, right? I wonder what were maybe some old ways that you thought about parenting that maybe were a little bit more based in like sort of like the ego land that you have swapped out for maybe more conscious or more of like a spiritual perspective on parenting that you feel like has helped you navigate parenting with a little bit more ease or maybe even just a little bit more forgiveness and compassion.
Yeah, the first thing that comes up for me is this expectation that I could be a mom that never traumatizes my child. It's very perfectionistic. You don't think it is because you're like, I just want to do what's best for my kid. I don't want her to go through what I went through. I want to protect her from all of these things. But in the pursuit of that, what you're actually teaching your kids is perfectionistic thinking and that making mistakes is not okay and that you absolutely shouldn't forgive yourself for doing something wrong. And I absolutely had that happen to me. I'll never forget there was one time that I did get upset with my daughter and I felt so guilty because again, what's playing in my mind is don't ever yell at her, don't ever lose your cool, got to be the perfect mom. And so I put all of that pressure on me, which then amplifies that feeling of I made a huge mistake. I shouldn't have done that. It's all of that self-blame, self-shame. And my daughter was like, "It's okay, mommy. Like, I understand it's okay." And my response to her was, "It's not okay. I shouldn't have done that. That was not okay." Again, I'm thinking I'm doing the right thing by like owning it. So I'm continuously not letting it go. She gets home from school and I'm still kind of like upset with myself and she's seeing this. And fast forward a little while later, she ends up like playing a game and she kind of like bent the rules a little bit, something to that effect. And she felt so guilty. She like crumbled into crying and was like, "Oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that." And I said, "It's okay. Like everybody makes mistakes, it's totally fine." And then she said, "It's not okay. It's not okay. I shouldn't have done that." And I heard it. I was like, that's what I say when I make a mistake in parenting. I say it's not okay. I don't accept forgiveness. I certainly don't forgive myself, and I don't let myself off the hook. And so when I saw that being reflected in my daughter, I was like, oh, in an effort to be a perfect parent, what I'm modeling is don't make mistakes, which is the same trauma I had. So it's really sneaky the way that it might show up. And ultimately, after that, I now do model self forgiveness and I totally name I am not a perfect mom. I'm going to make mistakes all the time. And I'm learning how to forgive myself. I'm learning how to see my intention underneath that. I tell my daughter all the time that when I do get upset, it's an opportunity for me to look inward and kind of ask myself what I need. And now that's what she's learning, right? I think other parents and other people that I've observed or people that I've talked to, I think a lot of times ego comes in with parents in terms of who they want their kid to be. I don't think I had that personally because I was very much given a role of who I was supposed to be to my parents, and I didn't want to do that to my kid. But I think a lot of parents, if they never were like a soccer star, they want their kids to go into soccer. Or if they had a lot of troubles in school, they're like, the kid needs to study really hard because I struggled. So a lot of projection happens onto kids, but that's how it showed up for me in my relationship with my daughter.
Whew, I'm so grateful that you shared that because one of the things that I've always felt a little bit sensitive to discuss since I am not a parent yet, and I just totally recognize it's one of those things you can't really understand until you're in it, but I'm very empathetic to, right? Is this thing that we do where like we're so afraid of bad scenario happening that that becomes our goal is avoid bad thing. right? But when we're acting from fear, it is always a self-fulfilling prophecy, always. Really, any action that we take is a self-fulfilling prophecy, but fear is as well. And in those situations, you almost kind of get the inverse of it, but is an extension of that fear. You're never avoiding it. Right. And it's been something that's so interesting to observe because even with the example that you had with, and I can even say for myself, I also had parents who really felt like there was a certain picture of what success would be like. Right. And they really drove towards be this version of successful. And I have a twin brother, and we responded to that very differently. Like I responded with the, okay, I got to morph myself into this exact thing and I got to push down everything else. And I just got to, kind of like bend and flex and, chameleon into whatever this is. And he took a little bit more of like a rebellious and kind of like avoidant route, which makes perfect sense because you either go anxious or you go avoidant. You tend to go in either direction, right? But really, like what I was able to see even in some of my own inner child work was all based in fear. They had a story that if it wasn't success, then it would be suffering. If it wasn't success, then it would be pain. If it wasn't success, it would be all of the things that they were running from that they had experienced, all of the things that they had not yet made peace with that they experienced, right? And of course, and they're like love, because sometimes we say that, love is the motivation for this, which I don't actually think, but I understand how we justify that to ourselves, right? They said, I don't want my kids to experience any bad thing in the world ever. And then all of the dominoes fall in the way that they do. So I want to ask you about that last part, that sort of underlying fear that comes underneath that perfectionist thinking of I don't want my kid to experience XYZ bad thing. And I wonder, how do you approach that as a parent? How do you think about that kind of thing when those sort of fears come up, or maybe even when you see clients or people that you're working with or loved ones approaching situations in that way?
I love this question so much. So, I think it's a beautiful intention that parents have, or any of us have, when we don't want to see our loved ones go through something. And we're like, oh my gosh, just take my advice because if you do, this won't happen to you. Right. And this is coming from a very protective, safety based place. So, well intentioned for sure. But I realized so quickly that it's actually so disempowering. What you're actually saying to the person is, you can't do this. You can't handle this. You're not strong enough. You're not smart enough. You need my help to figure this out. And you're not going to be okay if this happens, which is frankly the messaging I definitely inherited. And that leads to such lack of self trust. And so now my perspective is so different with my daughter. I want her to go through as much as she's supposed to. I don't want to get in the way of her journey, her healing, her trajectory, her expansion. I believe in her ability to become who she's meant to be. And that includes the contrast she has to experience in order to unfold into that. And so I saw that it was such a disservice that I was giving her to not let her experience any pain. First of all, it's impossible. Like you said, you end up just creating what you're trying to avoid. So I'm not doing her any favors, but the best thing I can do as a parent is to help her to trust herself, to make decisions, and to get out of any problem, any circumstance that she's in through trusting herself. And the only way she's going to learn that is by going through things. Right. And so a lot of it is reflecting in your own life and, looking at all the stuff that you went through as a kid. And that's kind of where that desire to protect them from that comes from. But then when you look at it from a different perspective, it's like, oh, yeah, but everything that I went through made me who I am today. And I'm still standing here. It's actually a symbol of my resilience, my strength. Right. And so now I'm like, I don't want my daughter to miss out on that. And so I think that was a huge perspective shift for me to realize I'm disempowering her. The more that I protect her from experiencing pain, it's actually saying, I don't think you can handle this.
100%. 100%. So the guides have so many thoughts on this. They're like in my ear so loud about it. So I'm going to share some things that are coming through as Gina talks about this. Okay. When we're talking about kids being a mirror, they also become a mirror for the things that we avoid. And I think one of the questions that we can ask ourselves, just as like humans who are trying to, become more authentic, become more heart and soul and love centered, like what things we think we have to swerve. Right. Because even in that, we're disempowering ourselves that we like have to, that we need to, there's like a little bit underneath that. But like, do we really feel like we have to avoid hard things? Do we think painful situations are inherently bad? Do we think difficult situations are bad? Do we think failure is inherently bad? Right. If we hold those beliefs, of course, we're going to pass that on to our children. But let's get clear about something. When you think painful situations are bad. You are limited. You are chained. You are shackled. Think about all the times that anxiety is running your life, where there's things that you want to do and you feel like you can't go there, or there's pain that feels like it controls you because you don't know what to do with it, right? When we develop that avoidant energy, or even that judgmental energy of calling these experiences something that we can't navigate or that are not good to have, we are limiting the experience that we're having. They're showing me like we're limiting that sort of like that phoenix from the ashes experience that we can have, that pain, that suffering, that failure can offer us and teach us. So when it comes back to how we're looking at parenting, it was so funny. I had somebody in my life who it was very clear, like grandparents and parents were always trying to make sure that, the people in their family never felt uncomfortable, like never. And one of the ways I did that was financially, right? Like, oh, let me send you money for this. Let me send you, like, we just don't want you to suffer, right? And it was so interesting because I had so clearly, and I was like basically a teenager at the time, there was a part of me that could so clearly see of like, why do you see suffering as an enemy? Like, why do you see discomfort as an enemy here? I have learned some of my most valuable lessons about life that have prepared me, that have made me a better like human in this civilization through moments of discomfort. Like, why are you making that an enemy? It's like a plant that doesn't have the opportunity to grow deep roots. Like, you're kind of doing the plant a disservice. It's a little flimsy here. Do you know what I'm saying? And so I think us reflecting on like, what is our relationship to the normal, the absolutely normal traumas, I guess you could even say, because some people kind of call it that when it comes to parenting, right? Like some of the normal discomforts, the normal pains, the normal things that happen in life. Like, why are you demonizing that? Are you demonizing that? And how are you passing on that fearfulness, that limitation, that disempowerment perspective onto your kids? What do you think about that, Gina?
I love all of that. Yeah, I really think that for most of us, we need to change our relationship to pain and suffering and quote unquote bad things happening in our life. And I think I've always been somebody, much like you from high school. I remember that's when I first heard this quote that pain is never without purpose. And that became my mantra pretty much from like 13, 14 onwards, that it's not something that's happening to you or against you, but ultimately for you, if you choose to see it that way. It's not always easy. We've all gone through different degrees of trauma. And so it's not like I'm smiling through it, but there's a deep knowing that I am strong enough to get through this, right? And that this is truly what becomes the evidence of you believing that you can trust yourself. This is what becomes the evidence of you knowing that things work out for you. But you can only do that if you go through it, not, like you said, villainizing that painful experience. And so I truly just believe it's like the degree to which you can feel the pain is the degree that you can feel joy.
100%.
They're all relative,
It's
right?
on the same spectrum.
It's on the same spectrum. And so if you
Yes.
want to numb the shadows, you're going to numb the light.
Yes.
And so I have always been a big proponent of feeling all the way. Of course, titrate the experience for yourself. I am a trauma-informed coach, so I'm not saying to re-traumatize yourself, but at your own pace, opening up what's inside so that you can see the gift in it, again, on your own time. But yeah, I think teaching our kids to be afraid of pain or bad experiences, once again, is such a huge disservice, but it does reflect what is my relationship to pain? What is my relationship to mistakes and things going wrong? And you see it in kids all the time, right? Like my daughter's in grade 4 now, and you already see it from kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, the comparison that happens, right? One kid gets a better grade or seems smarter than the other, and you start to see that. But again, I'm also viscerally seeing through my child how that is actually building up her strength, right? It's an opportunity for me as a parent to guide her through those experiences instead of teaching her, again, to avoid it or to shove it down or to try to manipulate circumstances so that you never have to feel that. I'm like, let's go head first, girl. You got this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love what you said.
It feels like the guides do want to pivot to talking about parenting as leadership as like a
Mm.
flip on that. But before we go there, I just want to kind of close out this part to say that if it's feeling really hard to make peace with the fact that your kids will experience some sort of frustration, some sort of pain, some sort of trial and tribulation, right? Remember to come back to a state of safety in yourself, and you might need to reorient your perspective on safety. A lot of this work that I'm talking about, moving from like an ego 3D perspective to a soul perspective, a really big shift in that is understanding that nothing can actually threaten us. And I want to be clear about this because as parents, we do have a role to play and making sure like the basic needs of our kids are met. And of course, be responsible, of course, like do your job as like the leader in this situation to keep them like physically, emotionally safe in the ways that you can. But as adults, have we understood that like nothing can threaten us, that we're like literal life force energy, that everything here is just an opportunity to understand how we're life force energy, how pain and mistakes and bad experiences don't taint us, right? Like, have we reoriented and redefined what safety really is? Because when we don't feel safe is when the ego comes up and when those fear stories and fear strategies come up. And I really do feel like a lot of the sort of like generational parenting strategies are really fear strategies. They're avoidance strategies. They're coming from a place of fear and avoidance in the name of quote unquote love, which is not the same thing. It's not the same thing.
It's not the
So
same thing. But you're so right. I truly believe that you're only ever in one of two paradigms. You're either operating from fear or from love. And for parents, when they operate from fear, it has the mask of love, right? And so many of us experience that with our parents. Like, I know my parents love me, right? They did keep me safe. They gave me food. They took care of my basic survival needs, but it wasn't coming from a place of love. They were loving me from fear, like you were mentioning. And so I love that you named those two different paradigms. And it's about us really exploring within ourselves, where am I operating from truly? Is this masking anything? Because even the perfectionism part for me of like, oh, I'm trying to protect my daughter from, ever experiencing any pain, felt like it was coming from love. I'm trying to protect this person, but it's actually rooted deeply in fear. And that really took me some time to excavate and understand within myself. And the way that I knew that it was coming from fear was, again, how I was responding. Love doesn't respond with like intense anger and, this pressuring and kind of putting the stakes were so high. So I think those are one of the clear markers that that you're not operating from love. It's like, how much red tape is there around this circumstance?
yeah, the last thing I'm going to say about that, because again, I'm feeling the guides wanting to like show an alternative here, how we can shift the intention that we're acting from when we're doing something like loving people and parenting. But I just want to share as my experience as an Akashic Records reader, where I'm tapping into the records of all the things, including people's soul contracts and objectives that they have in their life, having the honor to be able to do that with people in sessions. Like, one of the things that is always made so clear is like, we have so much intention for the things that we want to experience here. And we're capable and we got stuff we got to do, And like, your children are their own souls with their own soul contracts that got some stuff to do here. It feels like for anybody that we're loving, friends, partners, parents, siblings, family members, like, our job is not to interfere on their path. We got to give them the dignity of their path. And we have to trust the divine, like, orchestration of things, especially when there's stuff that's out of our control. I feel like as parents, especially when there's things that are out of your control, you kind of got to have a little bit of trust here. Like, they have their plans, they have their angels, they have their spirit teams who are all around them all of the time, helping them master their soul objectives so that they can fulfill their own purpose. They can fulfill their own growth so they can be led on a path towards their life of most fulfillment. Like, we got to get out of the way a little bit when it is appropriate, especially at like different ages of development and, through parenting, to like let them figure it out, And oftentimes our soul contracts do include like, we got to roll in the mud a minute to figure some stuff out. Like, that's just the nature of how we learn things. So if it helps for you to just be reminded of that, or to think of it from that perspective, that, maybe them having their friend that didn't want to hang out with them anymore at school and them feeling a little bit of social rejection, right? Like, that's nothing you can control. Like, let the soul contract stuff, you be again the leader, you be the supportive, like, you be the one that teaches them how to navigate something like rejection, not the one who tries to make sure they never feel rejection. You feel the difference there?
Oh, hugely. And or for them to get involved in a way to, like you said, like try to stop this from ever happening. And I see that happen quite a bit too, where parents, I don't know, get involved in different ways where it's not actually teaching the child, how to move through this. It's more teaching the child, yeah, go externally to have something else outside of you to solve this instead of going inwards and finding your way of how to navigate through this, as you said. So beautiful way to close that. Love that.
Okay, so let's talk about the shift here, right? Like, we've started to expose how the ego and fear can kind of be a little bit sneaky in its effort to support us, help us, meet objectives that are important to us. If we had the objective that like the goal of parenting is to protect our kids or avoid, XYZ bad thing that we experienced and have it made peace within our own lives, like, maybe that's not coming from the soul. Maybe that's creating more problems than it's helping, right? Here is an alternative. And we can use another example to illustrate this, right? And you and Sam talk about this with money and abundance all the time. Like, what you're taking action on is the most important part here, right? It's okay to have fears. It's okay to have thoughts come up, but like, what are you picking up? What are you stepping into? What are you acting on? Like if there's something about money, am I making an action based on scarcity or am I making an action fueled from abundance, right? Am I making an action based on that there's not enough or that I'm afraid that there won't be enough, right? Or that there's too much or whatever? Or am I making an action that feels heart-centered in the belief that there's always more than enough and it's going to happen? Like these are technically could be the exact same action, but why we're making it, our overall objective for when we're making it is very different. So with that, like sort of example, what do you think a shift is, Gina, that people could start to think about? If it's not, I want to protect my kid and prevent them from this, that, and the other thing, which is kind of this like sneaky below the surface motivation for a lot of like maybe goals that parents have or the ways they think about their role as parents. What are some swaps that maybe they can think of as like, instead of, I want my kid to be so successful, like what is a alternative that feels like it's based more in abundant love and soul energy that maybe helps you stay focused, stay oriented in your values, and stay plugged into your soul when you're parenting?
Yeah, the number one thing that's my North Star is I really want to get to know my daughter. I want to know who she is. I want to get to know who she's becoming at every stage. I think it's very normal for parents to want to delay the growing up of their kids. I certainly have that. But I love every stage because she's always her. Whether she's 40, 20, 10, it's always just more of her. And I think when I make it my job to get to know who she is, that inherently leads to understanding her needs. How does she need to be loved? How does she need to be led? How does she need to learn this lesson? Or what involvement am I able to play in her learning this lesson? And I think when we make it our job to understand and know and see our kids, all the projections and the agenda goes away, right? It's really about being agendaless to some degree. I understand, like you said, there is, of course, basic needs to meet for children, of course. But when it comes to guiding our kids, I truly think it's more about, I want to understand who you are. I don't want to assume who I think you should be or who you already are, who I want you to be. It's really taking that step back to allowing her to blossom and unfold and surprise me with who she is. So I've learned so much by observing that.
I love that. Yeah. And I feel like, again, when we can really see how it is safe for people to just be how they are, for them to have whatever path they're going to have, that probably feels way more accessible for you to be like, yeah, I just want to know who she is. Like, I want to see it. I want to understand it. I want to get to know it. I want to be able to be in relationship with it. And for whatever my role is in helping that thrive in her, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, because even when it comes back to that example of the friendships, right? Instead of me telling her, this is how you should handle it, I always ask her, what do you think you should do? What comes up for you? Like, what about that really upset you? Instead of me being like, oh my God, I can't believe that girl did that, right? Because that would be assuming I know how she feels. But instead to ask her, what was that like for you? Right. And she's crying. And I'm like, and again, we want to assume, of course, I know why she's crying. It's not, of course, right? They might be upset about something completely different and they might word it in a completely different way. And my daughter is so good at analogies. It's incredible the way that her brain works, and seeing her process these experiences that she goes through before I interject has been so illuminating, because it's what shows me, oh, you actually have so much wisdom already inside of you, which then creates more safety within me, right? I'm like, okay, like, I really can continue to trust that she has this innate ability to guide herself. But it's also good for her to see that. I think at this age now that she's 9, there's less again of me interjecting and kind of, when they're 2, you have to kind of show them how to share, how to, like, not maybe scream at somebody because they took one of your toys or whatever. But I think at this age now, she's really learning this independence and really finding out who she is. And so even when she brings me something, I'm very careful to not go into advice or coach mode right away. And so I always ask, do you want me to listen or do you want my advice? And I don't think she's ever actually said to me personally, I just want you to listen. She's always very curious for my advice, which has been pretty interesting for me to observe. But even in that case, I still ask her, I'm really curious to know, what was that like for you? What's coming online for you? Why do you think that happened? How would you have handled that if you were that person? How do you wish that went, right? And it gives her that space to process, which I think is more important than us necessarily trying to teach a lesson. I think the greatest lessons that they're going to learn is from their own processing of these emotions and experiences.
Ugh, I love that. And what I'm even hearing too is that, like, through this, you were able to center her. It gets to be about her, which is the point of
Yes.
parenting, right?
Mm.
And when you're talking about giving her the space, like you're also giving her the tools. Like being a parent is like being a teacher for 18, 20 years, right? Like how is she ever going to learn when she's in her big job that she's going to work when she's, I don't know, 25, right? Like how is she ever going to know how to deal with feelings of anxiety, feelings of rejection, feelings of people aren't listening to me, they don't care what I think, I'm not good enough? Like how is she going to have a basis for how she can navigate that in herself if she's never given the opportunity to try and figure that out when she has a guide, when she has a nervous system to co-regulate with, when she has a trusted, compassionate like person to reflect back and to help answer questions if she has them, right? Like, where would she ever learn to do that? Which is, I think, a lot of us who are older now, we're like, we don't know what to do because we literally never had the opportunity because like our parents didn't have the skills or capacity to be able to do that. But at the very like crux of it, we didn't get to have that experience where somebody said, okay, why don't you try? And I'll let you know. I'll let you know if you need, if something's going to go awry, but you just go ahead. Let me know when you need me. Tap me in.
Yes, I love that. And my daughter asks like so many incredible questions. She'll just ask me, like, why do you think this happens? And I used to just answer, but now I just love asking her, like, why do you think that happens? And it's like her responses are always so, like, kids are so present. They're so plugged into who they are. Like, they're not filtering. She's just says whatever's on her mind. And I really want to encourage that. Again, like not second guessing yourself and allowing that voice to be activated and shared and expressed. And so I think, again, it's like, getting out of the way and giving them an opportunity to respond and ask themselves these questions and let this ruminate and see what kind of comes up and out. And I promise that if you do this with your child, you probably will learn a thing or two. I think you'll
I
be
love
really
this.
surprised.
Okay, so swapping out maybe one of our objectives or goals as a parent from this like protector, ensure that everything is always cushy, which again, underneath it is really avoid bad things, right? Switching from that to like, hey, maybe my role is to get to know them. Maybe, right? And that's like an affirmative goal. Right. In manifestation, they talk about like not using negative language and affirmative language. Like, I don't want to feel pain versus I want to feel joy. Very different outcomes, right? Like, I don't want my kid to feel upset versus I want my kid to feel loved. I want them to feel supportive. Those are two very different kinds of motivations that inspire different actions. The second of those being more heart-centered and soul-centered ones. So I love, 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 love this. I just want to get to know my child more. Go
I was
ahead.
just going to add one more thing. I think another maybe different way of wording that I want to get to know them is the word like seeing them. And I think that word seeing someone, it's a nuanced word, right? Because I think we automatically assume I see her. I physically can see her with my eyeballs, right? But to see someone is to really deeply understand them and to know them. And that's why like I use the word get to know them, but I think seeing someone goes to so much more depth, right? You can have a friend that knows you. I know this person for 10 years, but when you have a friend that sees you and deeply understands the words that are unspoken, understands these maybe dreams that haven't been said or expressed, understanding these kind of in between the lines type of energy, I think that's the depth that I want to get to know my child at every stage. So I just wanted to kind of add that little nuance.
I'm so glad that you did because even like what I hear in you saying that is that you're also like seeing the soul of them. Like you're seeing at the Kyle Cease event, they say like you see the God in them, right? Like you see the source in them. And I feel like when we like sort of challenge ourselves to see the God in people, we also challenge ourselves to move past judgment, first of all, and also to see the possibilities. And that automatically engages us in that abundant love soul paradigm versus the ego and fear paradigm, right? When we see that this child is capable of navigating things that are a little difficult, right? They're capable of navigating uncomfortable situations where they have to learn, like they're capable of being brave because they are literally a little like piece of God on this world, right? Like seeing into the depths of what they really are, which only parents can do if they've looked into the depths to see what they really are, right? It's just this like beautiful concept. I'm so, so happy that you shared that. I do want to pivot because a lot of the questions that we got were in moments where children are exhibiting behaviors that, we've come to associate with them struggling. Right. So whether this is like a young age of maybe kids that are dealing with like really, more extreme behaviors or tantrums or like that, or maybe they're a teenager and they're in this sort of like portal to adulthood and maybe they're struggling with depression. Maybe they're struggling with school, maybe they're like really rebelling out, right? Like these times when, we've done the best that we can and we arrive in a situation where like there seems to be sort of like cute manifestations of something that doesn't feel positive. It feels like there's something more going on. I can imagine as a parent that that puts you in such a state of fear and probably a state of judgment and shame, thinking like, oh my gosh, what did I do? Or what didn't I do? Or what did I do wrong? Whatever. I wonder, what do you think like a more soul approach to when that kind of thing happens could be? Of course, we could name for days what that sort of like more 3D ego approach is. That's what most people would say, like in the world, right? But like, how would you think about those kinds of situations and approaching parenting?
So I think every single time our kids go through something, it kind of goes back actually to what we were saying before about seeing them. Right. I think before we can really see our kids, we have to see ourselves. So when I see something that my daughter experiences and it might be really hard for her, maybe she is struggling at school, or yeah, maybe when she's a teenager, she has her first heartbreak. It's really important for us to check in with ourselves. Really, I think before sometimes we actually deal with our kid, because otherwise there can be a lot of projection that happens, right? We're not seeing ourselves because it is painful to see me, for me to see my child hurting. That is alive for me. When I hear my child going through something and she feels left out or whatever it might be, there's something that is coming online for me. So it's super important for me to be with that. I have to be my own inner parent, be with, oh my gosh, what was that like for you to see your own child struggling so much? What is arising inside of you that is asking to be seen? Do you have an unmet need in here? Because a lot of times, again, it's very insidious, right? We go from like, I see her struggling, our safety alarm goes off, our nervous systems are in fight or flight. Now we're just in problem solution, fixing it mode. But I think when we can slow that down and acknowledge that, wow, something is coming online for me. It's a very beautiful intention that I want to protect my child, but my daughter needs a regulated mom more than she needs an answer or a solution. So my go-to is always, how can I regulate and meet my own needs so that I can be that, kind of anchor for her as she's experiencing this. And so for me, I think, there's a quote that I think Matt Kahn says, that you can only meet someone as deeply as they've met themselves. And it's kind of the same thing with our kids, right? We can only meet them to the degree that we're meeting ourselves. So I always think, how can I help myself so that I can help her? That's the way that I would take that approach. I think when we're dealing with kids who are, depressed or have anxiety, it's very challenging. And I've had to deal with this with different degrees with my own kid, but a lot of my clients or my friends who are dealing with things like this. And I think what I see as the biggest common thread that is going to be helpful for everyone is, you have to take care of your own needs. You have to monitor what is online for you, because otherwise it just gets enmeshed into whatever you're going to do to help them. And even as I say that, I'm hearing somebody being like, but what if, like you just take 2 days before you talk to your kid about that? And of course, no. Like, I think there's micro moments you can take as a parent. And I think we don't always have the luxury to like, yeah, go into a room and meditate for 3 hours on this. But to even acknowledge within myself, ooh, I'm seeing inside of me something, alarm is going. It's even just me acknowledging and noticing that. And then for me to tell myself, I'm going to come back to that and actually keeping that promise. So after she's gone to bed, it's me coming to myself, checking in with me, and then I can go back and do further repair. But in the moment, if I don't have that time, then of course you just, as much as you can, try to be present with what's there and respond from a conscious place, and really just be aware of, like you said, where am I speaking from? Is this fear? Is this love? How can I plug into that state so that I can give her and attune to her for what she needs?
Yeah, I'm feeling the guide say that your kids don't need your perfection, they need your presence and they need your heart. That's all they need.
Absolutely.
So
That's
are
it.
you in your presence? Are you in your heart without the answers? And can you just do your work, like take responsibility for your own self to get back into presence and get back into your heart if for some reason you've jumped out. Another thing I'm hearing them say is, and it feels like they want to give an example here, is if you are having children that are kind of like acting out, as some people say, what is your relationship to the parts of yourself that act out? Do you judge them? Do you think that they're inherently bad? Do you think that they're here to harm you? The parts of yourself that are quote unquote lazy, the parts of yourself that get angry and nasty, like, do you think those parts of yourself are inherently bad? The answer is they're not, but have you learned that they're not yet? Because if you look at your kid and you're really thinking like they have like bad intent or something, like the kind of energy that you're going to come and meet that with is fighting energy, and fighting only ever fuels things, by the way. So that's not even a good strategy, right? Like, and we're in judgment, and what we're seeing becomes alive. We see a more like ill intent energy get fueled, right? Whereas if I look at myself and I know there's a part of myself that gets really angry and gets really snappy and gets really mean, I know that she's not bad. I know that she's so good. I know that she has such a big heart. I know that she's so tender-hearted and she's so sensitive. And when she feels like her big, beautiful heart has been poked with something that doesn't feel like love, like she has a really hard time with that. She has a really hard time with that. She also gets very overstimulated by all of the things happening around her with this beautiful gift that she has for sensitivity. And sometimes the best tool that she's learned how to like assert her space back and to push things back out of her is with this really harsh language, right? Like, can I have such a deep level of compassion to see what's really going on with parts of myself that act out? Because when I can see through, I'm like getting a visual of there being like a kind of like a black mist, but like in the mist is like a very vulnerable child, right? That's like bright white, gold, perfect, pure, right? That's like sitting in the middle of this. Can I see through it to see that child? Can I speak to that child? Can I not judge the smoke, which keeps it set? Can I see what's happening, dissolve it all through, and speak to the vulnerable little child in the middle of that fog, right? And I feel like that is the kind of leadership that is required of parents if they have the capacity for it, right? Like, can you see past the normal human behaviors of coping that we pick up to see like the purest kid that's probably just struggling to figure something out, struggling to learn something, and that needs your leadership and guidance. And most importantly, they need your compassion and for you to see the best in them. It feels like what the guides like wanted to share, especially if again you have a child who's kind of acting up and you're really struggling trying to figure out how you can approach it and support them.
I love that you said that because I think, again, we have to attune to what is being triggered inside of me. And yeah, what am I labeling this as? Because a lot of times I think parents project, like, what will other people think? Right. So they're coming from a place of, I don't want other people to judge you, but really it's you judging. Right. It's like it's striking a chord within something you're judging about your kid or you're judging about their behavior or another kid that's like that. And so it does require a lot of inquiry within to figure out like what is the meaning making of this, right? Why would this even be so bad? But ultimately too, the way that kids act is their form of language. That is how they're expressing their needs, especially for younger kids, even under 25, your brain is not even fully developed yet, right? So especially for younger kids, like around my daughter's age, and when they're first learning who the hell they are and learning about their independence, it's like they don't have words for these big emotions. Frankly, adults still don't, right? That's why we yell at our partners. That's why we yell at our friends or yell at our parents, right? It's coming from a place of, I don't know what to do with this emotion, and it's just bursting out. And so even when kids are like, I hate you and I don't love you anymore and you're the worst mom ever, thankfully I haven't had to personally experience that, but I used to look into that a lot because I was so afraid. Oh my gosh, what if my daughter hates me one day? But that's not about my daughter, right? It's like, what is the meaning making for me if she were to say that, right? And why am I making that wrong? That's a totally separate topic. But if your kid is saying things like that, instead of hearing, oh my God, I can't believe they don't respect me and they're saying that they hate me, it's, wow, you must be feeling something so intense for you to say something like that. Like you said, seeing through the fog and actually seeing past the action and seeing the feeling that is being expressed through the action. I think that is our job as the parent, because sometimes the kids are not going to have the language to understand that that's what they're doing. They just don't. They think that they are mad about the ice cream or the song that you didn't play or, the thing they didn't get in their lunch. That's what they do think they are mad about. It's our job as the parent to translate that, like throw it into Google Translate and see what is the feeling underneath that is just being expressed through this specific circumstance.
100%. And like, if you want your kids to think well of themselves, think well of your kids.
Yep.
If you want
And
them
think
to
well of
always,
yourself too.
which you
Yes.
can't do. Yes,
Exactly.
you can't like see the best in your kids if you've not seen the best in yourself,
Exactly.
100%. But like, if you want your kids to always be able to find their heart, you always want them to be able to find the light that was within them. Show them how they do that in moments where they're acting in maybe not nice ways. Like, I still see that in you. I still see you, and I want to help you get back to that. I want to help you navigate whatever et cetera, that we've talked about. Like, again, think about that. Like, how do you want them to treat themselves in moments where they're really overstimulated, they're really overwhelmed, they're a little lost? And can you provide that sort of like leadership while they're kids to show them this is not only how I do it for myself, but this is how I'm going to do it for you, because that's the imprint of how they're going to treat themselves for the rest of their lives.
100%. And I think it's so much about normalizing these experiences. And that's why, for me personally, again, this is what I do. I'm pretty vocal with my daughter about the things that I go through, of course, to an age appropriate degree. But I constantly tell her, yeah, like some days I have a really hard time too. You know, one time one person was mad at me and that was really hard for me. And this is what I say to myself sometimes. And sometimes I can be really hard on myself too. And yeah, that must be really painful for you. Tell me more, right? It's about like normalizing that, right? Instead of, again, being in this avoidance of feeling pain. But, you know, my daughter hears me all the time talking about how hard my day was. She hears me all the time that like I doubt myself. So for her to come to us and say, hey, I felt really insecure today, or I felt really anxious today, it's so normal. There really isn't any shame, at least for her, in what she feels or feeling embarrassed about anything. Even when she does feel embarrassed, she feels safe to share that. And I think the more that we can normalize that this is part of our experience. And I always tell her, like, I actually love it when you're mad and you're really sad and you're really frustrated. I love all of the colors of you. I love every different shade of who you are. And I think the more that, again, we can love that about ourselves, you know, can I love me even when I'm mad? Can I love me even when I'm being so stubborn and difficult and unwilling to, you know, change something? Can I love myself even then? And I think that's how we start to really understand what unconditional love is. It's loving them in any condition, right? And so that means when they're having a tantrum and they're saying, I hate you, when they don't respect you, when they don't listen, can you really be able to see them inside of that and not just the behavior? And I think that it has been one of the bridges for me to experience that within myself, right? So if I'm not successful, quote unquote, in something within my business, or I don't achieve a goal, I no longer just see, wow, I failed. It's not about just seeing the action of quote unquote failure, but wow, I saw who I was throughout that. And I saw the way that I showed up for myself after I was really hurt. Ooh, and I really saw that I put so much time and effort into preparing. And oh my gosh, I saw all the ways that I had to coach myself through this experience. It's seeing, again, past just the surface level. And it goes back to actually seeing ourselves and seeing our kids to that kind of deeper level.
I love that. 100%. Okay, so my final question, this is something that a lot of the questions that came through kind of oriented around. A lot of parents talk about having what can feel like sometimes almost a crippling fear of being a bad parent, of not being a good enough parent. And we've talked about a lot of the like next level versions of that, which is like, what if I mess up my kid? Like, what if, you know, I traumatize my kid? Like, we've already talked a little bit about those things, but to close this out, what would you say to a parent who feels so much anxiety around this idea of being a bad parent to their kid?
Ooh, I have so many ways I want to take this. I think number one, I would define what even is a bad parent. How do you know? Number two, how do you know if you're being a good parent? Like, how do you even define that, right? The word good and bad, that whole paradigm is one that I try to divorce myself from, because I don't think anything is really inherently good or bad. It's just the way that we might label it. 100% ego. And the funny thing, it's not funny at all, but the thing to know about judgment is that judgment creates alarm in our body. As soon as we experience any source of I'm being judged, it creates alarm in our body, which nervous system gets activated. And now we are in whatever nervous system response that we might gravitate towards. And so I think as soon as we try to not be a bad parent, we're instantly in an activated nervous system state. So I think for me, I had to definitely define what it would mean to be a bad parent or a good parent. If there is such a thing, how would I know? And it's about, for me, my definition of quote unquote being a good parent is taking care of myself. Like, it's literally, I need to take care of me and be a regulated parent. That is what will make me a quote unquote good parent, right? Is being able to model for her what it looks like to take care of me and to guide myself and to ultimately then guide her. I think the other thing too is I would externalize this personally to what if my child constantly said, I just want to be a good kid. I just want to be a good daughter. I don't want to be a bad daughter. It's like the same thing I would say to her, that it's impossible for you to be a bad daughter. You just are a daughter. There is nothing you can do, be, or say that's going to change the quality of you as a daughter. And the same thing as a parent. I mean, I guess you could argue there's some maybe bad parents out there, but we're speaking to your audience who I think are very plugged into consciousness. And so I think even this fear of being a bad parent, it's not about parenting. There obviously is other areas of your life that you're labeling yourself as bad. And this is just another pathway, another path of least resistance that your ego is going to use against you. And so to kind of zoom out of that and see in what other ways in my life am I labeling myself as bad? Because I think then we can get to the core of this core wound belief that you're not good and that you need to earn your good. And that's in the basis of so much of my work with my clients, and I know for yours too, of really uncovering who we really are without the label of good or bad. And so to me, anybody who's saying, I don't want to be a bad parent, I'm always going to be signaled towards, okay, there's something deeper underneath that you are not seeing clearly. There's a distortion within you that you're labeling as bad, and that's just being projected onto this. So yeah, there's kind of a few
It's going a little
exits I want to
deeper.
take on there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I literally would have answered exactly the same way. It's like, what does that mean to you? I just think the words that we use signal so much about what's subconsciously happening, and our subconscious beliefs are what drive everything, right? So, and in the same way that we've been talking, having the motivation of not wanting to be a bad parent versus deciding what you feel like some of like the core values are for you as a parent, right? I want to be a present and regulated caregiver. I want to prioritize knowing them and helping them thrive. I want to be as best of a leader as I can and just be me. Do the best I can, be me. Like, let's just say these are your values as a parent, right? Like the difference in saying, I want to do my best at being this kind of parent, positive language, versus I just don't want to be a bad parent, create entirely different experiences. I read Kim Durama's book. She said that our brain is like a dog with a bone. And so when you give it the task of like, am I a bad parent? It will look for all the reasons why you're a bad parent. When you give your brain let's look for all of the reasons how, all of the ways that I am getting to know my daughter. I'm getting to be present. I'm getting to show up with love. I'm getting to be a leader, which really is her kind of teaching me as much as I'm teaching her. But like, hey, I'm doing my best when I got to step into the leader to do, you know what I mean? Like, give your dog a bone for something that's going to create the joy and peace that you want. And if you got to do a little bit of thought work underneath that, highly encourage it. Both of us would, because that is part of how you give yourself the kind of freedom to act from your soul instead of from your ego with such an important job like parenting.
Oh, so beautifully said. So beautifully said. Yeah, I love that concept of the dog with the bone, because it's just confirmation bias, right? It's like our
Yes.
RAS system in our brains. And there's this Brene Brown quote that said, like, don't look in the world for evidence that you don't belong or that you're not worthy, because you're going to find it, right? So if you are looking for reasons to believe that you're a bad parent, aka bad person, you're going to find it. And so yeah, I think, ultimately, I believe that really good parenting is always going to start with how we parent ourselves. It just does. I think our kids are always going to reflect back where we can be a better parent to ourselves. And then in doing that inner work, we then do become the kind of parent that they really need. And I think to, like you said, be regulated as much as possible. But on the flip side of that, I think I would add, and when I'm not regulated, I want to be the kind of parent that finds my center in whatever way that I can and finds my way back, right? To me, it's not about, okay, I never want to get upset with her. I never want to lose my cool. But when I do, this is how I ideally want to respond to myself. And I'm not going to do that perfectly. I'm going to make mistakes. It's giving yourself permission to screw it up. And it's such a hard thing. Like, I was so resistant to that. I was like, no, I'm not going to screw this up. I don't want her to go through this trauma. And that's why this is kind of a multi-prong approach, right? I feel like we've kind of hit a lot of different angles to this same kind of topic. And it's because there are different layers to this, right? And so the more that we can support ourselves, the more that we can support them, the more that they reflect back to us the things that trigger us, the more that we realize, wait, that's triggering something in me because of this. And it just is this constant like jigsaw puzzle, I think, that we get to keep kind of putting together. And again, give ourselves that grace to make mistakes. And I think that's the greatest lesson we can teach our kids, is how to make mistakes. Because ultimately, that's a self-love journey, right? It's like how to be okay and love yourself unconditionally, no matter what. Because when we love ourselves unconditionally, there's literally nothing to fear. The only thing we're ever actually fearing is a lack of love. That's really what it comes down to: lack of acceptance, lack of success, which boils down to having a lack of love. And so if we can teach our kids unconditional self-love through us loving ourselves unconditionally, that will set them up, I believe, for the highest level of resilience that they'll ever need.
100%. Snaps all around. We can step out of that ego energy, which is fear energy, with love, coming back to safety, and really plugging into who we are as souls, seeing our kids for who we are as souls. And a lot of will unfold, and we'll get a lot of support even from the spiritual realms when we're in and open in that vibration. Thank you so much for coming on and talking today. I loved this conversation. Who knows?
Me
Maybe the
too.
audience will have more questions they want to hear, and maybe we'll get to have you back at some point.
Yay, I would love that.
But in the meantime, please tell all of the audience where they can find you, if there's different ways that they
Mm.
can work with you. Just give us all of the details.
Yeah, so my Instagram is just at Gina Bourne. I'm sure you will see my spelling of my name on the show notes there. Podcast is called Spiraling Higher. I co-host that with my best friend, and it's all about healing consciousness. Very similar topics to what you talk about as well. I do one-on-one coaching. Obviously, you and I got to work together. The next thing I'm actually launching, I don't know when this is going to be released though, but either way, I'm really excited about this next offer. It's called Unwounding, and it's actually all about healing the mother wound, which is very near and dear to my heart. It's one of my core wounds that I'm sure many of us share, but it's really going to be this healing circle. But other than that, yeah, I love helping women to really heal their fear and alchemize their fear to really step into the life that they actually really want to live. And whether that be through one-on-one or our group containers, yeah, there's lots of different ways to connect with me. So I also love getting DMs. So if anybody wants to reach out with any notes from the pod or takeaways, I would love to hear. But yeah, I think that's it. Just me and the
I
pod.
love that. Yes, follow her on Instagram. We'll have her Instagram link in the show notes. She announces different groups and things that she's doing
Yeah.
there all the time. They do fun workshops. Like, it's a grand old time. It truly is. Like, your guys' stuff is great. I love how much fun you have. I love especially Sam. She gives it like a very serve it kind of straight kind of energy, which is so fun. And it really is like it's a great time. You guys balance each other's energies so wonderfully. There's so much wisdom and healing that comes through. It's one of my favorite podcasts, like one of the ones that I go to and listen to the most. And they've had some stellar guests. So please go check out Gina's
Yes.
page, check out Spiraling Higher, check out their co-host, Sam. And thank you again for coming on the podcast today. This was so much fun.
This was such a gift. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. And for all of the people listening, I will see you guys next week for more breakthroughs. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Breakthroughs with Brie. But before you go, please take a moment to either rate and review the podcast on whatever platform you're listening to it, or share this episode or maybe one of your other favorites with friends or loved ones that you think might enjoy or benefit from this content. Both of those things help more than you know, so that I can keep creating these episodes to help us all have more breakthroughs. Remember, you can connect with me on social media, sign up for my email list, hear what products, services, or events that I'm currently offering, all in the link in the show description or by visiting my website, healingwithbrie.net. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your support and for the time that you're taking to heal yourself and align more with your beautiful soul, as it helps us all so much more than you realize. I'll see you all next week for more breakthroughs.